Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it really centers on one of the most significant shifts in modern governance, the enduring tension between, well, institutional political parties and the rising influence of new social movements.
And we're really asking a fundamental question here. Are traditional political parties, the very structures that, provide the framework for democracy, are they being fundamentally superseded?
Exactly. Can new social movements, or NSMs, serve as a superior, more authentic alternative in mediating the relationship between the state and society? Or are parties, despite all their, let's face it, well-documented limitations, truly indispensable for institutional continuity? I'm going to argue that NSMs are in fact better equipped to channel and respond to the complex demands of contemporary global society.
And I'll be maintaining the counter position. While, yes, the structural issues facing parties are very real, I believe they remain the foundational cornerstone. Political parties provide a necessary structure, a stability, and a mechanism for aggregating interests that social movements, just by their very design, cannot replace in the long term.
Well, when we look at the evolution of modern political structures, the evidence points to a system that's experiencing a profound internal decay. Traditional parties are struggling. They're showing very clear signs of structural rigidity and a decline in the ideological clarity that once defined them. This isn't a new phenomenon, of course. I mean, decades ago, scholars like Otto von Kirschemeier analyzed the emergence of what he termed the catch-all party.
A crucial concept, yes, but how does that really manifest today?
It manifests when a party's core aim shifts from implementing a specific, a transformative ideology, whether that's labor rights or conservative fiscal policy, to simply maximizing votes. It becomes about prioritizing the acquisition of power above all else. This focus on winning elections means they abandon strong normative values to appeal to the broadest possible base, which often results in platforms that are vague, generic, and ultimately unsatisfying to committed citizens. The party becomes lesser representative of principle and more just a pragmatic electoral machine. And furthermore, these large institutional structures are highly susceptible to what Robert Michels famously called the iron law of oligarchy. This law predicts that even organizations founded on democratic principles, be they political parties or large unions, will inevitably become controlled and perpetuated by a small, self-serving elite. We see this today in opaque party nomination processes, where powerful internal committees or major donors dictate candidate selection, and that creates a deep disconnect between the party leadership and its grassroots members.
Okay, I see why you think that. You're focusing on the internal corrosion and the maybe inevitable elite capture of established organizations. But I think that perspective, while powerful, it dangerously overlooks institutional necessity. I mean, you are describing symptoms of party failure, but you're not offering a replacement for their non-negotiable functional role.
But that premise rests on the idea that the existing institutions are sufficiently representative. What if the structure itself is the problem?
The structure is mandated by the system. Political scientists like Zoya Hassan have argued that parties are absolutely foundational in representative regimes because they perform tasks that no other actor can reliably execute: nominating viable candidates, creating the governing agenda, mobilizing electoral support on a massive scale, and perhaps most critically, ensuring stable democratic governance. Harold Lasky, he stressed their critical function in preventing arbitrary rule. Without parties structured to take and wield power constitutionally, governance risks falling to what Sigmund Neumann warned against: control by a highly fragmented, chaotic, and, at the end of the day, an unstable, unorganized mob. But law suggests that certain electoral systems, specifically the single ballot, single-member district system used in many democracies, inherently favor the development of a two-party system. So parties aren't merely political preferences. They are structural necessities that are baked into the mechanics of how modern representative regimes function. They are the only entities legally established to acquire, organize, and administer political power across an entire nation, not a pressure group, not a social movement, which is fundamentally defined by its limited, often single-issue scope.
That's a powerful point about structural necessity, I'll grant you that. But let's pivot to the core functional difference between these two actors, which, I think,
boils down to the nature of representation itself. Aggregation versus identity. You championed aggregation, but that aggregation, I would argue, is precisely where parties fail modern society.
Wait, how can the need to govern be a failure? Parties must facilitate the aggregation of a massive, complex, and often contradictory wide range of issues and policies. This is what allows for the complex function of running a modern state. Managing defense, healthcare, taxes, and infrastructure all at the same time. A system where political influence is driven purely by actors prioritizing narrow, selfish interests, which is an inherent limitation of pressure groups and many movements. It just cannot possibly achieve the necessary consensus for comprehensive national policymaking. This broader focus ensures overall stability.
I would reframe that aggregation function as a strategic constraint that leads to political inertia. I mean, we've seen a necessary shift in recent decades, moving away from simple class-based mobilization toward complex, identity-driven politics. Think about the ongoing feminist struggles, LGBTQ+ rights activism, or issues surrounding migrant justice.
Okay.
Parties, because they're constrained by this need to secure a broad, compromising, median voter consensus, they often fail to champion these new, complex identity issues that challenge deeply entrenched social norms. For instance, a major political party trying to win a national election will inevitably water down radical climate action or specific LGBTQ+ protections just to avoid alienating regional or conservative voting blocs.
So you're suggesting NSMs are superior because they're uncompromising?
They're superior because they are transformative. Movements like Black Lives Matter or Fridays for Future don't just ask the current system to pass one bill. No, they challenge the fundamental social and cultural frameworks of policy and power. They're leveraging global solidarity, social media, direct action to generate cultural and social change that pragmatic, institutionally focused parties simply cannot risk pursuing. A party cannot risk a transformative goal if that goal jeopardizes their majority in the next election.
I understand the allure of transformative goals, I do, but we have to return to the issue of responsibility. When Fridays for Future organizes a global climate strike, yes, they raise critical awareness, but they bear zero responsibility for the subsequent disruption to the school system, to the economy, or for finding the hundreds of billions of dollars needed for a global energy transition. This highlights a crucial difference in accountability.
While that leads directly to our second point, accountability and institutionalization. The oligarchy critique suggests that institutional channels are often captured by elites, which makes them unresponsive. So when power is concentrated, NSMs provide a vital bridging role between a complacent government and the populace. They inject new blood and urgency into the democratic process.
But what does accountability even mean for an NSM? Accountability in the context of state power requires contesting elections, securing a legislative majority, and ultimately being judged by the electorate for the tangible outcomes of your policy decisions. That is the fundamental defining mechanism, separating responsible governing parties from protest movements.
I'd say accountability means ensuring responsiveness even when the ballot box is failing to deliver. Rajni Kothari argued that NSMs were born out of the deep dissatisfaction with a parliamentary democracy that had already been captured by these elites. NSMs deepen democracy through active political participation outside of traditional structures. This aligns with Hannah Arendt's theory of political action, that moment when citizens collectively assert their political will. They force issues onto the public agenda when the formal system is just paralyzed by elite self-interest.
That sounds very idealistic. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the chaos generated by movements always equates to positive accountability. Let's look at the materials warning about anomic interest groups. These are spontaneous groups that use unconventional and highly disruptive tactics. Riots, sudden demonstrations, blockades, precisely because they lack a formal structure. Think of the Yellow Vest movement in France, or historically extremist separatist groups like UFA in India.
But those are extreme examples.
They are, but the material highlights that a reliance on spontaneous disruption may quickly lead to political chaos and conflict, thereby threatening the very democratic stability NSMs claim to strengthen. Disruption is a tactic for protest, not a formula for sustainable governance. If the goal is truly to be a superior alternative, one must offer something more than just volatility.
I would argue that such disruptive tactics, while potentially problematic, are frequently a symptom of institutional failure, not the root cause. When legal, formal avenues of redress are blocked by oligarchical control, what options remain for people on the margins? We can't confuse the justifiable anger that drives protest with an inherent desire for chaos. And besides, many modern NSMs leverage highly organized, though non-electoral, methods: global coordination, digital mobilization, legal challenges. These demonstrate a structural maturity far beyond the simple, unorganized mob you invoked earlier.
Organization for protest is one thing. Organization for running a bureaucracy is entirely another. And this brings us back to the inherent tension between ideological purity and the necessity of pragmatic governing. The core aim of a political party, as Duverger stressed, is to acquire power so that it can implement some version of its agenda. Parties, even if they appear to become pragmatic, like the Indian National Congress shifting its focus to power acquisition over strict adherence to its founding ideology, they provide the necessary flexibility to navigate complex political realities and maintain stability. That ability to compromise is key.
The problem with that flexibility is that the party structure eventually becomes defined by compromise, not conviction. The core issue is that these pragmatic parties become totally detached from their founding principles. It leaves a massive ideological vacuum and makes political choices seem, well, meaningless. When the platform becomes pure centrism, where's the representation for those seeking radical solutions?
I'm not convinced that ideological commitment is dead within the party structure. I mean, we have plenty of examples of doctrinal parties like the Bharatiya Janata Party in India, which maintains a deep commitment to its Hindutva ideology. However, even these doctrinally committed parties recognize they must temper that ideology and deploy it strategically to win a majority and control government effectively. The pragmatism you're criticizing is simply the necessary maneuvering required to transition from a philosophy to enforceable national policy.
But that pragmatic maneuvering forces parties into an institutionally constrained box. Doctrinal parties and even specific interest parties like the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, which focuses on tribal issues, they still represent specific, often narrow goals within the formal system. NSMs, conversely, challenge the underlying system entirely. They aim to, and I'm quoting here, alter social institutions or create entirely new social orders. That provides a far more profound and transformative avenue for change than institutionally constrained parties, which are so often forced to choose stability and compromise over genuine systemic reform. If parties prioritize surviving the next election over principle, then NSMs become the necessary voice of revolutionary or at least fundamental change.
But who manages the day-to-day operation of the state while the NSMs are attempting to alter the entire social order? The fundamental limitation of the NSM position is that they only provide the pressure. They don't provide the plan, the budget, or the sustained structural capacity to manage a modern political economy. This makes them crucial political actors, yes, but perpetually insufficient as a governing alternative.
So, in sum, new social movements are crucial political actors. They are filling the vacuum created by the institutional inflexibility, the ideological decline, and the elite capture of traditional political parties. They are necessary to effectively channel modern, identity-driven, and often global demands for fundamental social and cultural transformation when the formal channels, the catch-all parties, are simply unwilling or unable to hear them. They are the engine of change.
And while NSMs are undoubtedly powerful drivers of societal pressure and can force issues onto the agenda, they fundamentally lack the legal structure, the institutional continuity, and the capacity for comprehensive interest aggregation necessary for stable representative governance. Political parties, for all their flaws, remain the indispensable structural mechanism required to translate collective political will into enforceable law and exercise state power within a structured democratic framework.
The material makes it abundantly clear that the study of political dynamics today cannot be limited to the institutional framework alone. Rather, it requires appreciating the complex, necessary, and often tense interplay between these two essential forms of political action, with parties providing the essential structure and NSMs providing the transformative pressure. And both of these are profoundly shaping political outcomes across developed and developing societies today.